Well, if we're into anything on this podcast, we're into the scary and the strange and the unusual. But there's a figure who I had heard that he had a book that drew my attention, and I'd heard bits and pieces of his story. And he's a Catholic priest named Father Malachi Martin. Now, over his 30 years that he spent with the church, I mean, he performed thousands of exorcisms.
Yes.
And, literally doing the Lord's work, to be, just bluntly honest about it. And like I told Eric, this was a figure that I wanted to learn more about. So this was a story that even I came to with not like a full picture, but this guy's life, you want to talk about an interesting person. This guy lived. And I mean, even his death is kind of shrouded in mystery. So tonight's episode is about Father Malachi Martin.
From a child born into this world, we are taught what to believe. Closed-minded we become, fearful to be deceived. Still we desire to know what lies beyond that locked door. The art of the storyteller, conjuring tales of legend and lore. History hidden, lost knowledge, things forgotten and the unknown. These are the things that direct us and will set the tone. Welcome, friends, to another episode of Nightmares on the Lost Highway.
So, Malachi Martin was apparently a regular guest on
Coast to Coast
AM with Art Bell.
Good old Art Bell.
Which we've talked about numerous times. I think, if anything, that's kind of the genesis for what we do here. I love Coast to Coast AM.
Oh,
and
yes.
Eric, I believe, has a little...
Yeah, he did several interviews, but in Art Bell's own words, basically, here is how he introduced Father Malachi Martin on one of his radio shows. It wasn't called a podcast back then, radio shows. And here it goes something like this. Father Malachi Martin, former Jesuit priest, former exorcist for the Catholic Church, one-time advisor to 3 popes, a best-selling author, as a premier investigator of clandestine politics and unlikely alliances of popes and cardinals. His books are rare insights to the men who guide nearly 1 billion people in faith while they broker destinies of countries and continents. A member of the Vatican Intelligence Network under Pope John XXIII, Malachi helped extend the reach of the Catholic Church through the Iron Curtain in Russia back in 1964. All to the concerns of corrupting power, Martin himself was released from his vows of poverty and obedience after 25 years of being a Jesuit priest, where he came to America, settled in New York, doing a few odd jobs, until he was able to start having his own books published with the help of a Guggenheim Temple, where he wrote his first bestseller book called Hostage to the Devil, and a long line of other book titles, all giving a unique insider's look and, in his words, reveal the battles, the power struggle, and corruption within the walls of the Vatican Church. That was Art Bell's opening introduction of this man. And far be it from me to do anything better than Art Bell could do. So I thought that would be maybe a good way to kick this episode off.
Well, born in Ballylongford, Ireland, on July 23rd, 1921, Malachi was one of 11 children and the son of a physician. And Martin joined the Jesuit order in 1939 after studying philosophy for 3 years at the University College in Dublin. He taught for 3 years, spent 4 years at Milltown Park, Dublin, and was ordained into the priesthood in 1954, taking his final Jesuit vows 3 years later. He took a doctorate in archaeology, Oriental history, and Semitic languages in Belgium's Louvain University, and learned to speak fluent Hebrew and modern and classic Arabic during his doctorate studies. He completed further studies at Oxford and the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. He participated in archaeological digs in Egypt, Lebanon, and Jordan, and it was in Egypt that he found himself assisting in his first exorcism in the mid-1950s. An exorcism was happening, and the assistant to the exorcist fainted during the performance of the rites on a young man. Now, Malachi was called upon as someone who just happened to be nearby to come and assist. And that became the very first exorcism that he was ever a part of. Now, like Eric said, we can go on about his accolades. You know, he was appointed by the Vatican to be a professor at the Pontifical Biblical Institute in Rome. He served as a private secretary to a Vatican cardinal, best-selling author, of course, advisor to 3 different popes, like he said. But most famously, he was an exorcist. And eventually, you know, he would start to have contrasting views with how the church was being run. And after 10 years as a Jesuit priest, he left the church in 1965, believing that the church had taken on far too liberal a course in its policies. He also came to believe that he had studied and witnessed evidence of the Roman Catholic Church's involvement in covert satanic worship within the church itself. So after being released from his vows of poverty and obedience, he moved to New York City in 1966. Now, Martin maintained that he remained a priest and that he had received a special dispensation from Paul VI that while he would cease activities as a clergyman, he was free to do what he pleased as long as he did not dishonor his priestly vows and the sacramental validity. So, you know, he'd left the church and then moved to New York. Now, while living in New York, he worked as a cab driver, a waiter, dishwasher, became a United States citizen.
He was a very humble person, and I think that goes miles in explaining. I mean, from all this man had going on, he didn't walk away from it, but he didn't want to be directly connected to it for various reasons.
Yeah.
But then it wasn't above him to take on these odd jobs, do whatever needed.
Now, while living in New York, eventually he was able to start making a living as a writer, and Eric referenced some of his books, and we can talk about those later. But through his work in New York City, and again being kind of street level, if you will, he saw the need for people to be assisted and needing support in times of need, either from demonic infestation of themselves or someone they knew in their home, in their family. And he felt that the church's position on exorcism was not as strong as it could be. And they weren't providing the assistance that people needed to help them combat the forces of evil. And so he returned to the church just to fill that particular role. Like, he saw that as his obligation to help people in that respect. Now, his work in the field of exorcisms led to him being one of the inspirations for the 1973 movie The Exorcist. But he did know that the exorcisms were not as dramatic as they appeared in the film, although still pretty intense at times. He said there would be temperature drops and foul odors and manifestations. He noted once in an interview with the Examiner, quote, "Everyone will know there's something in the room that wants you dead. It's a horrible feeling knowing that unless something happens, you are going to die now. It is like an invisible animal with claws, and it wants you dead." Martin also claimed that he had been granted the ability to see demonic spirits on occasion, which he viewed as a necessary grace to his work, and described demons as physically grotesque and spiritually malevolent. During his time as an active exorcist in America, he would even work with the likes of Lorraine Warren. We've talked about the Warrens before. He was a regular guest on Coast to Coast AM, like we talked about, between 1995 and 98. And he would take calls from listeners who would tell him about the things that they were experiencing, the disturbances in their lives, and then he would weigh in and tell them whether or not they were actually suffering from the satanic influences and what they should do. He was once quoted in the Chicago Tribune, "A lot of people don't believe in the devil. They shake their heads and say it's a myth. I wish to God it was." I mean, he took his role as an exorcist very, very seriously.
Now, as I had mentioned, and Bill had alluded to as well, he served as a Jesuit priest for like 25 years, started seeing things that disturbed him. I won't use the word offend. A lot of it confused him. A lot of it, he said, disturbed him. And in a 1996 interview with Art Bell, these were some of the topics that Art and he discussed that was on his mind. Now, some of these, we're fast forwarding here to present day of 2024. A lot of these they've come full tuition. But some of the concerns that he mentioned was, number one, will the church force Pope John Paul II to resign? There was a big stink during that time frame about all of that. Number two, will the church dynasty allow ordained women priests? That was all a brand new thing, and how are we going to handle this?
Well, and to be fair, let's say that I'm not going to say that I 100% agree with Father Martin's views. He was very conservative.
Yes, very
in his
conservative.
views on the church. And so there are things that he considered progressive. You know, I don't understand why a woman couldn't fulfill those roles in the church. You know, that's
why I was
far be it from me.
tiptoeing on the tulips here, but
no,
that was 1996.
From his view, the church was becoming far too liberal. And again, like I said, he said that he saw evidence of satanic influence in the church.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Number 3, how will the church discipline priests with inappropriate behavior? And how much of this have we heard?
Apparently, he definitely stepped up to do his part to combat that.
Number 4, will the church acknowledge and allow homosexual marriages? That was a big topic back then. And actually, I will get into some of that with some of my news articles. Number 5, how will the church handle mafia influences of corruptness with finances within the church?
Wow.
That's a big one. Number 6, how will the church handle satanic connections even associated with the Masonic temple?
Yeah, I saw a reference to that.
Kind of throw the Masonic Lodge there
the
under
Masons
again.
are involved in everything terrible, right?
And number 7, how will the church react to the increase of demonic possession? Father Malachi, he says basically, I'm drawing back the elusive curtain, this veil, shrouding the secrets of the Catholic Vatican, allowing outsiders to peer in, and this is in his words, to one of the most financial conclaves of all time, being the Vatican City. Many may know this, may not know this, but Father Malachi reveals that this is one of the only fully self-supportive financial and church government power forces in existence today. So these were all things that weighed heavy upon his mind.
Well, and I'm not going to sit here and argue with him on that account. I think money is a huge corrupting influence in religion especially, and I think we see a lot more of that in these days. I mean, I'm sorry, these mega churches, I mean, isn't pride supposed to be a sin?
And my biggest problem, I will say, and again, I've mentioned, I was brought up very devout Christian faith. My issue, and I do understand both sides, let me just state that, but you have these $1 million churches. I mean, they have indoor swimming pools. Part of them have ice skating rinks, for Pete's sake, but the doors are locked and can't help like the homeless people and stuff.
What was it? My favorite story along those lines is Joel Osteen down in Texas when things were terrible. And they would not open the church.
Would not open the church doors. Yep.
I mean, if you have $1 million, you can build a big fancy building, or you could do a lot of good for a lot of people.
Yeah, an ice skating rink, really? Couldn't you do something better with your money?
I don't need to go to a church with a swimming pool.
No,
they could have done something better. Well, anyway,
back to the exorcisms.
Yeah, Malachi was involved in a lot of stuff, and even in his career, I mean, there was some shady things that were. That he was, I don't want to say involved in, that's not the right word, but that were happening around him. A good story along those lines is in 1998, a friend and assistant of his named Father Alfred J. Coons was found murdered at the St. Michael's School in Dane, Wisconsin, his throat cut. Now, Martin said on a national radio program he was found at 7 o'clock in the morning with his throat cut from ear to ear, in his own blood, face down into it, and with various acts of desecration of his body, which are normally associated with Satanist-inflicted death. Now, of course, they were co-workers. They had worked together. Coons had consulted with Martin on multiple exorcisms, and Martin believed that he had been picked off because of the work they were doing. Someone wanted them permanently silenced, and he referred to the murder as, quote, the assassination of Christ's hero. Now, some believe that Coons' still unsolved murder was because of his work as an exorcist, with a Father Charles C. Fiore of Lodi, Wisconsin, occasionally speaking of secret missions that he and Coons would make to Chicago to combat Satanism and priestly pederasty, which we've talked about. One former St. Michael's parishioner once said that the things Fiore described, quote, made the hairs on the back of my arm stand on end. I mean, they were specifically going on these expeditions into Chicago to combat the evils, one, of satanic influence, but two, of, corruption in the church from the sounds of it.
Literally, soldiers of the Lord.
Yeah. And Coons himself expressed concerns for his own safety in the weeks leading up to his murder. And now Martin said that Coons' exorcism work was always kept low profile due to most of it involving, confessional material. Obviously, that's kept in confidence.
Privy stuff.
But Martin also said that more than one good priest in the region got a phone call indicating that they may meet the same fate as Coons. So, I mean, even something like that, their good work, like, made them targets.
Targets, for sure. Now, one thing I wanted to touch upon is I am not Catholic. I wasn't that familiar with their beliefs. I did have a couple friends in school were Catholic, so I thought for some of our listeners who may not be that familiar, just a nutshell version of the background of the Roman Catholic Church. It's the largest Christian denomination in the world, with approximately 1.2 billion members across the globe. Its origins in the earliest days of Christianity, the Church traces its leadership into the person we know as the Pope, to St. Peter, identified by Jesus as the rock in which the Church would be built. Now, the Catholic Church in the United States numbers over 70 million members and is organized into 33 provinces. Each one of those provinces are led by an archbishop. Now, each bishop then answers directly to the Pope, not an archbishop. Those provinces are further divided into 195 dioceses, each led by a particular bishop. All the base of organizational structure are local parishes, headed by a pastor, appointed by the local bishop. The Conference of the Catholic Bishops of the United States meets semi-annually. Now, as part of the global organization with its institutionalized center, being the Vatican, the Catholic Church in America is shaped by worldwide society and cultural trends. It is further shaped by the leadership that is entirely male, with women excluded from the priesthood and thus from keys of leadership roles. So I just kind of wanted to throw that in there when we're throwing out terms, bishops and cardinals and different things. It's all basically steps in the ladder, if you will, to reach up in management, basically to get to the Pope. But as Bill did, I found Father Malachi Martin's exorcism stuff probably the most intriguing.
Yeah.
He was, however, I will use the word early whistleblower, if you will, on the Catholic Church. Not so much the beliefs of the Catholic Church or anything, but just those individuals that exist within those walls that have become corrupt.
Well, yeah, I
want to make that very clear.
He saw signs of evil influence. He did call out, again, the child molesting priests, which, say what you want. We know that happens.
Yes.
But, it wasn't just that he was at odds with the way the church was going. It was very much he saw corruption that we now know existed. So Father Malachi, he did all the work with exorcisms and all that. And ultimately, some feel that led to his death. Now, he went to perform an exorcism on a 4.5-year-old girl in Connecticut in 1999. And he was driven by his friend Robert Morrow, who was a former CIA agent. And it seems like an odd pairing, but, they worked very well together. And,
yeah.
Robert would drive Martin to these places. And as the two arrived and were making their hellos, this little 4-year-old girl walks up to Martin and says, "So you're Malachi Martin, and you think you can help her?"
Mm-hmm.
Now, whatever happened, I don't know the whole story of all that. But, of course, Robert Morrow kind of explained that this was one of the creepiest, most unsettling things he'd ever seen. Felt it was, again, one of the most disturbing things ever. And, he spent years in the CIA. So there's no telling what he'd actually seen. And again, felt this was horrific, one of the most disturbing things ever. And ultimately, it was believed that this possessed child led to Father Martin's death, because he told his friends that he felt he was pushed by an invisible force. And he died on July 27th, 1999, at the age of 78 after suffering a brain hemorrhage with wood fragments embedded in his skull caused by the head trauma suffered during the fall. Now, some, of course, claim that Martin's death was not due to demonic forces, but that he may have been a target, like his friend Father Coons. Even in interviews prior to his death, when he was asked if he feared for his life due to his involvement in, revealing corruption and such.
Whistleblowing.
He said he was, but that by that point in time, he was far too old to change. So you got to respect that. Now, like we said, Martin performed thousands of what he called minor exorcisms, a few hundred major exorcisms. And like Eric said, really the exorcism part is what drew me to this. Now, in addition to his own private work, he also worked with notable demonologist David Considine and paranormal researcher John Zaffis. And like we said earlier, Martin published these books, both fiction and nonfiction. He started writing in 1958, writing about the Dead Sea Scrolls. He was approached at one point in time by David Berkowitz, the son of Sam Killer, who did claim to be possessed by a demon when he was arrested, and he asked Father Martin to help him write his autobiography. Of course, he declined.
I was going to say,
outright.
whoa.
But perhaps his most famous work is, of course, Hostage to the Devil, which he wrote in 1976, in which he described 5 real exorcisms carried out in the United States. In this book, he made a point of describing not only the horrible physical, mental, and psychic manifestations of demonic possession, but also the process whereby each person became possessed. He said it was not always through extreme wickedness or occult involvement. Sometimes it was just as simple as drifting away from the church and from an internal narcissism and selfishness. He also said that a person cannot unknowingly become possessed, that they must actively allow themselves to be possessed.
They would definitely know it.
Yeah. And they would become possessed through a process of systematic and gradual deception by the demonic. Now, perhaps the most disturbing thing that Martin wrote about was what he called the perfectly possessed. And that is when a demonic possession is so complete that these people no longer exhibit any unnatural signs or manifestations. You wouldn't be able to tell them from any other person. They wouldn't be repulsed by the holy iconography such as the crucifix or the Eucharist. They could even outwardly practice religion. They could be members of the church.
Kind of a hybrid demon.
Yeah, they could hold rank within the church, but they wouldn't be there, to do the teachings of God. They would be there to, of course, subvert those teachings and
take it
bring
off the
in
rails.
The influence of Satan. Now, Martin, of course, would explain the details of some exorcisms, and Eric, you can maybe help fill in the gaps as we go here. But, in it, he called an exorcism a process through which, it was a battle of wills between the exorcist and the demon, and that to be successful, the exorcist must be empowered by God through the church and have a cleansed soul via confession. Now, the process would routinely involve the exorcist, as well as an assisting priest, and bystanders who were not church people. I mean, they may be members of the church, but they didn't hold rank, and they would be used for restraining the possessed as necessary. Now, I've read a few, accounts of exorcisms, and that's apparently a very important role because, one, for the protection of the priest and his assistant, but 2, for the protection of that person, because they'll lash out at themselves and inflict self-harm. So you don't want anybody getting hurt, that doesn't need to be hurt. Now, Martin stressed that it was important for the exorcist to learn the demon's name. The lesson with that was that in order to defeat evil, one must first identify evil. He also stressed that conversations should never become personal. It was always about faith and not about the exorcist. He did document that in one case, the demon said that the exorcist would be made to suffer, and when the exorcist said, quote, "I am willing to suffer," he was lost because he made it about himself. The demon was able to overcome him and defeat any efforts because he made it about himself. It wasn't about the greater good. The lesson here, of course, is that to fight evil, it is always Jesus, never man. We cannot fight evil like this under our own power. The third point that he stressed was that an exorcist should never engage a demon in any kind of logical debate or conversation because the demon will always win. They are smart and cunning liars. It is what they do. They use logic to distort the truth and promote lie. So the lesson there was that when confronted with a false teacher, it is always a waste of time to debate and discuss. You're not there to have a conversation. You are there to expel evil through your faith.
Well, again, kind of looking back over some of these interviews, not just with Art Bell, but with some of the other TV broadcasts and different things that Father Malachi Martin done, I just kind of made some bullet points. And Bill touched on a few of these, but I thought these were worth mentioning. Now, this is Father Martin's take on exorcisms. So, one, he was asked, are exorcisms real? And, his reply is, oh, they're very real. He stated that, again, he himself had been involved with thousands. He was quick to point out that of these thousands, they ranged obviously from the severe, probably less than 100 of those thousands, to what he called minor afflictions. Now, number 2, an exorcism, he says, is a demon possessing a human body. In its simplest form, it can be something as simple as alcoholism or drugs or violence. Bill mentioned even straying from the church. These, he says, are the easiest usually to address and has the best chances for success. However, again, only if the afflicted wants to be free. Only if that afflicted person is still in control and is wanting to, get rid of that skin of the demon. If they have given up and if they have accepted, they will know. And as Bill mentioned himself, they know if they are demonically possessed.
Yeah.
There really shouldn't be anyone out there, I wonder if I am. It is a yes or
yeah,
no.
like Malachi said, you can't be unknowingly possessed.
Yeah. And ironically, I found a lot of people that would call in after these talk shows, and especially like on the Art Bell, and they allowed them to speak to Father Martin, and people would call in several, and it was like, I don't feel myself. I think I may be. There was a lot of people that were fearful that they were possessed, and he was very clear. You are not possessed. I mean, just with talking with them a few moments, you would know. Number 3, if one is afflicted by a demon, again, they will know. Those around them will know. It is not to be confused with poor decision-making or by an accident. He says most generally the person will be one way at one time and then suddenly drastically change and lash out. That is a sign that an exorcism may be needed.
Yeah, in the things that I read, and I've read about exorcisms multiple times, there is a dramatic shift in personality and noticeable change.
Like a light switch.
People,
just boom, boom.
People will know that you are not yourself.
He goes on to say, he's often asked if someone, if they are possessed, like I touched upon, and again, he replies, you will know. He again stated, and I'll build off of something I heard Bill say, you don't become possessed overnight. Not even in a week, not even in a month. It's usually years to even decades. Number 5, he says the worst kind of possession in his mind is ancestry or genealogical possessions. Now, this is where a long ago family, could be a prominent family, but not always, at one time made a pact with the devil to allow a demon to become their familiar, their pet, a part of the family. Now, that demon will be cared for. They will be looked after. And I will say it because he says demons are neither male or female. They don't have gender, so they can alter that to fit their plans for the person that they're trying to take over. In return for this family caring for the demon, it may bestow upon any of its family members gifts or fulfill small wishes or tasks. He says in this type of possession, the children are literally brought up and raised not to fear this demon, and the demon may even help care for the infant through the time of puberty, in which the pact will then be passed on to that next generation, so on and so forth. Number 6, he says, he's asked often, do demons favor the rich over the poor? And his answer is very clear. Either. To a demon, money has no value whatsoever. It is simply trying to escape from hell. And the only way it can do that is to climb up the ranks out of the underworld and to find a host. It doesn't matter the financial status, the sex, the race, the color, anything else. A host is a host, a warm body to possess and live through. Number 7, he goes on and he says he personally doesn't like Ouija boards. And that kind of caught me off guard because we've talked about Ouija boards here on the podcast. And I mean, they were put out by Parker Brothers and Mass Numbers and all this. And he was questioned, well, why? Because, I mean, that's a mass-produced, I understand, but you seem very devout against Ouija boards. And he said, it is not the power of the cardboard or the paper. It is simply that you're opening yourself up. And by opening yourself up, you're inviting anyone in, and you never know who may answer. He says it is very similar. He said, I can say the same things to be true with practices of astral projection, seances, even meditation can be a tool used by a cunning demon to try to claw its way out of hell and to find that revolving door to be able to exit. He goes on, he says, I've also been asked, can a person be possessed by multiple demons? He says very clearly, yes, very easily, because with the affliction of one, that makes the body and soul weak. So therefore it is more enticing for others. And since all of these demons can work together, they're all trying to escape from hell. That's essentially their goal. And if one finds a suitable host, he can basically contact his friends and say, hey, there's room for more. He goes on, number 9, and he says he's asked if a demon who is expelled from a person, can that demon go into someone else in the room, even the priest? He states again, certainly, this is part of their mission. They will try anything to stay above ground. This is why a novice should never practice an exorcism. And for the most part, at least he says to his knowledge, he has never heard of a non-Catholic exorcist. He says we, Catholic exorcists, are trained for many years on how to armor ourselves against the darkness. We never enter an exorcism without days, possibly even weeks of praying and planning. While he was asked if anyone in the room assisting, as Bill mentioned, some of these people were assistants to hold down the person, has anyone ever died during a demonic possession or an exorcism? And his answer was a hesitant no. Further follow-up on that, he is, but some have died from a heart attack, and he knew one personally that was flung outside of a window falling to his death. Now, this kind of left a puzzled look on the interviewer's face, and Father Martin spoke up and he says, this was not, however, due to the physical attack of a demon, but more the power and the magnitude of the demon exorcised, and he was cast back into hell. Now, to me, if you're in the room and you're participating in an exorcism and you have a heart attack or you're chucked out a window to your death, I'm going to blame that demon for that.
Is that like a liability thing? Maybe. Because if you're in a theater and somebody yells fire and you get trampled, you died in the theater.
In the theater, yeah.
So,
but he was very clear. Oh, no. Nobody's ever died due to the demon.
Based on maybe the demon itself, but because of the activity of said demon.
Yeah, I would still debate that.
If you walk into a Walmart and you start shooting people, or you start pulling the trigger on a gun,
yeah,
you could say, well, they didn't die because Eric was shooting. They died because they got hit by a bullet. You know what I mean? Like,
or they were in a Walmart.
Yeah, or they were in the Walmart.
At the wrong time. Now, again, obviously, Father Malachi Martin made a lot of enemies.
Oh, yeah.
That's easy to say. And after his death, there was even more stuff that came out against him. And I found an article that touched upon some pretty dark stuff. But it was written by a William H. Kennedy. He was a fellow priest, a scholar, and also an exorcist. Now, this was published in June of 2002. And the article is literally titled, In Defense of Father Malachi Martin. And he writes, and I'm just going to do a couple excerpts here because there's a lot of this, honestly, that's just pretty dirty, nasty stuff that I don't even like to talk about. But he goes on in the article and he says, it must be recalled that Martin was making a lot of assertions about the holy, both in print and the public talks years before the famous Vatican bank scandal, which erupted in the 1980s. The Italian government uncovered a money laundering scheme wherein the Vatican Bank, the P-2 Freemasonic Lodge, and factions of the Mafia united in a criminal cabal to launder ill-gotten money derived from drug running, gambling, and extortion. This resulted in the removal of gangster Archbishop Paul the Gorilla Marcasinus as president of the Vatican Bank and promoted his deportation back to Chicago, where he teamed up with the equally vile Cardinal Cody, who operated as an international bagman for the Accardo crime family. All of this was cumulative and dramatic Masonic ritual murder of gangster banker Roberto Calvi in London. I probably butchered some of those names. Factions of this cabal may even have had a hand in the untimely death of Pope John Paul I in 1978. So again, we have a Masonic Mafia Vatican conspiracy that Martin was apparently kind of whistleblowing on that did come full-blown occurrence. So I thought that was definitely worth mentioning. And again, I wasn't Catholic. I don't remember in the 1980s, that kind of deal.
It probably wasn't the kind of thing you would have paid attention to at that time.
Probably not. Well, then he gets into and let me just say, many, 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 way too many priests, pedophiles, with children. But, Father Martin reported in 1996 that the Vatican was involved in an elaborate cover-up to protect child molesting priests that had kind of gained control of the major seminaries in Europe and the USA. Martin further claimed that secret gay sex cults were being formed within these seminaries, which involved child sex acts. One of the worst culprits, in Martin's estimation, was Cardinal Bernard Law of Boston. The fact was reported to the author on this piece as well as to the other people who have met Father Martin. Martin's reason for not publishing this revelation was that he feared for his life. Now, the child sex cult ring of the Archdiocese of Boston and the rest of the U.S. Church had come to light. Much of Malachi's claims in this area are now confirmed. He had written about it, but he had chose not to publish it. He had shared it with those that he trusted, and he did have it written down. Once it came to light, then he kind of passed this off. So again, he was privy to a lot of stuff. Now, I had also read he had a brother that was still in the Catholic Church.
Yeah, I think there were 3 of the Malachi.
And they are
3 of the Martin children.
Children were there, but they were kind of almost relaying that while he might have been cut out of those, that his siblings were giving him more information, even though that he had cut those ties. One of the most alarming of these type cases is a Paul Shanley, a Boston-based diocese priest who for 30 years molested preteens as well as adolescent boys, and was even a founding member of the perverted North American Man-Boy Love Association, which has abbreviations of NAMBLA, N-A-M-B-L-A. Even though a variety of individuals reported Stanley to Bernard Cardinal Law, Stanley was allowed to continue his sick lifestyle. When reports surfaced in one parish of Shanley's activities, the Chancery merely transferred him to another and paid off the victims' families. Once more transferred Shanley to another parish where he resumed his pedophile lifestyle. The Archdiocese of Boston never sent Shanley for any type of psychiatric help during the course of what Shanley called his 30-year youth ministry. And again, that story just goes on and on. I don't like to talk about it, so we're going to stop there. But again, just proof that this wasn't a guy that just left or cut ties with part of the aspects of the Catholic Church and went off on his soapbox dreaming up stuff. A lot of his predictions, I won't even say predictions, his reporting was true.
Yeah.
Not everybody, certain people were choosing to look the other way. And so, anyhow, definitely seems to have some merit. Very interesting man. Absolutely, for sure. It's time for headlines. I took mine out of the PBS World News article dated December 18th, 2023. This was by Pope Francis. And this is going back to the same-sex marriages. He states in the article that within the Catholic Church, same-sex marriages he considers a sin but not a crime, and therefore the Catholic Church is going to start allowing them. From Rome, Pope Francis has formally approved allowing priests to bless same-sex couples with a new document explaining a radical change in Vatican policy by insisting that the people seeking God's love and mercy shouldn't be subject to an exhaustive moral analysis to receive it. The document from the Vatican's Doctrine Office, released Monday, elaborates on a letter Francis sent to 2 conservative cardinals that was later published in October. In that preliminary response, Francis suggested such blessings could be offered under some circumstances if they didn't confuse the ritual with the sacrament of marriage. Now, the new document repeats that the rationale and elaborates on it, reaffirming that marriage is a lifelong sacrament between a man and a woman, and it stresses that blessings should not be conferred at the same time as a civil union. But the article goes on to state that such blessings should not be denied fully and stop. It offers an extensive definition of the term blessing in Scripture to insist that people seeking a transcendent relationship with God and looking for His love and mercy should not be subject to an exhaustive moral analysis. Ultimately, a blessing offers people a means to increase their trust in God, the document said. The request for a blessing thus expresses and nurtures openness for the transcendence, mercy, and closeness to God of 1,000 concrete circumstances of life, which is no small thing in the world in which we have to live. He added, it is a seed of the Holy Spirit that must be nurtured, not hindered.
I will also add, if you've been following the news, apparently this particular pope has used a slur for gay people that is not appropriate on multiple occasions in public now. So, I will say that I am kind of impressed by the progressive ideals that they seem to be embracing. Like you said, they have to adjust to the times, the cultures. And,
yes. And they saw a dramatic decline as for membership and stuff as well. So there is that.
Almost every religion has seen a dramatic decline in recent days. And I personally think it's just because of outdated concepts and not embracing that the world is changing. And, I do like the, love the sinner, hate the sin mentality.
Mm-hmm.
Just because you don't agree with their lifestyle doesn't mean you hate that person necessarily.
Correct.
And
Correct.
and they kind of touched on that. These people are seeking out the blessings. Why exclude them just because?
Yeah, they're asking for a blessing.
By showing them that, it brings them closer to the church. Like, hey, and maybe
rather than slamming the door in their face.
Yeah. So, well, back to exorcisms. From Business Insider by Julie Gerstein, dated October 28th, 2023. The title of the article alone: I am a Vatican-trained exorcist. I've stared demons in the face, watched people slither on the floor like snakes, and seen people levitate. So this is Father Vincent P. Lampert is an exorcist based out of the Archdiocese of Indianapolis. He is one of just 175 priests in the U.S. ordained to perform exorcisms. He shares what he's seen while battling demonic forces, and this article was written from the point of view of Father Lampert. So it was kind of just him talking and recording what he said. So I'm kind of going to summarize, it was very, very long. There's still going to be a lot of article here. But he's a priest for the Roman Catholic Archdiocese of Indianapolis. He was ordained in 1991. 14 years into being a priest, he was appointed to be the exorcist for the Archdiocese of Indianapolis. At that time, he was only one of 12 appointed Catholic exorcist priests in the U.S. As of this article, the number has grown to 175. It's my understanding that somewhere in the 2000s, I believe that the church felt there was a need for an increase in the number of exorcists, especially in North America.
Well, that's one of the things that the Father actually talks about is how much of a dramatic increase of demonic possession there was.
I'd read some articles about that. But he said, quote, "It's one thing to read all the book knowledge and to understand what the church believes and teaches about evil. It's another thing to see the practical application and to actually experience the demonic itself." Now, he says there's no such thing as a typical exorcism, and he has a very strict protocol that he follows. First, and this is important, the person needs to have a psychiatric evaluation and medical examination by doctors. Basically, he's saying, he's asking the question, is there something about this person's condition that cannot be explained by medicine? He wants to make sure that the person is, in fact, possessed.
Yeah.
Now, one of the things in here, one of the anecdotes I read, he was talking about someone who was schizophrenic and knew that they were possessed because of the voices and this, that, and the other, and got a psychiatric evaluation, said this person's clearly suffering from schizophrenia. And he said the guy was actually very, very upset to learn he wasn't possessed.
Upset?
Because he said, at least if I have demonic influence, I can explain why I am this way. So, but they want to make sure that the person is both mentally and physically healthy first. He then does an intake questionnaire to determine if this is in fact demonic influence. And the church works with anyone who believes that they're up against the forces of evil. He said he averages 3,500 people a year reaching out to him for help from all over the U.S., all over the world, all faiths, all backgrounds. It's not just limited to Catholic, people. And though cases of demonic possession are real, they're rare. He says maybe 1 out of every 5,000 cases brought to him is an actual case of possession. He said there are 3 types of extraordinary demonic activity. First is infestation, the presence of evil in a location or maybe associated with an object. Second is demonic vexation, which are physical attacks. And then there's demonic obsession, which are mental attacks. He says out of those three, he sees thousands a year. Now, real cases of demonic possession, maybe 1, 2, 3 a year. He says some of the things he's seen a person begin to levitate about a foot out of their chair, and that demons can do things that, you would just say were completely impossible. He's seen, when the demon manifests, people's eyes roll back in their head, growling, snarling, foaming at the mouth, things like that. Voice becomes deeper, more authoritative. There's been strong, horrible odors, stenches that are coming from the person that's possessed. He said, a person might drop to the floor and slither like a snake. Their face becomes contorted. Sometimes the tongue comes out in a very snake-like fashion. He says, but, through all that, here in his 18th year now of performing exorcisms, that none of this really phases him anymore.
It's amazing what you could get in, basically.
Yeah, amazing what you could get used to.
Yeah.
But he said
Wow.
recently he says, quote, during a recent exorcism, when the demon finally manifested, the person's eyes in front of me turned green and their pupils became slanted like a serpent. And this voice comes out of the mouth, a very deep voice, and says, "You can't get rid of us. We've been here too long and you're not strong enough." And then began to howl and growl and hysterical laughter and whatnot. But he says, in an exorcism, the real focus is not on the devil. The focus is on God. Quote, "It's really about helping people to know that the greatest thing in life that we can know are not the sins that we do, but it's God's love and mercy. God is always ready to forgive if we simply give God that opportunity."
Well put. Well, Bill, my question tonight obviously goes back to our story here of Father Malachi Martin. And as I said, he's early whistleblower in my terms, in the nutshell version. So my question to you, if you had a chance to be a whistleblower, now I'm not talking something minor, okay? We've both been places in different circumstances, but I'm talking something major, like life-threatening kind of circumstances. Have you ever experienced, known of, or if you did come across something like that, would you stand up and be a whistleblower? Because there obviously might be some repercussions, but how might you handle that?
I can't say I've ever been in a situation where I would, with 100% certainty, say that I had an opportunity to, but I think if I was, that I would, understanding that, of course, there'd be repercussions, potentially putting my life in jeopardy. I mean, the Boeing whistleblower,
Oh, yeah.
there have been 2 of those guys that have mysteriously died.
Yeah.
But I would think when presented with the opportunity, I would do what was right. So.
All right. Well, I thought long and hard, and the only thing I could really come up with, and I hate to beat a big dead horse, or in this instance, a big white fat nerd guy, was when I died on the operating table. And, we talked about that in one of our other podcasts. I think it was episode number 82, if I have my notes right. We dropped back in July of 2022, and it was on near-death experiences, and I shared a very personal story firsthand. And I won't go through all that again, but basically, in a nutshell, it was a new anesthesiologist coming in, fresh out of college, wanted to try something different. I ended up having something like 6 surgeries on my hand. This was the second or the third one. So I kind of knew what was to expect, what was the norm, and this was not the norm. Normally, they would just kind of block me, shoot me into my armpit of my left hand. I'd be awake during the surgery, and they'd have a little curtain up, and they'd do what they needed to do. But this anesthesiologist, I remember he came in, he introduced himself. I don't remember his name. I wouldn't say it if I did. But he says, well, we're going to do something different. And I remember we even had a little short conversation, and I'm like, well, the other ones seemed to work fine for me. But he pulls out this needle and decides to pull my head down and basically inject me with, I kid you not, a 6-inch needle through my neck. And I remember the nurse's concerned look on her face. And she said, you're going too deep. And he hit my spinal cord. And again, I relayed all this, but that resulted in me basically a near-death experience. I remember the nurses were losing him. I remember the monitors going flatline. Waking up many hours later in the recovery room, which should have been like a 3-hour surgery. We're talking like 8-9 hours in. And the hospital covered it up. But yet, my wife, who I just married that year, my parents, everybody noticed again, we'd kind of gotten used to this. This wasn't a one-time surgery. We'd already been in, and why it took so long to get out. Started asking a few questions to the actual surgeon, who I had a very good working relationship, have nothing but respect for. Again, I'm not here to drop names, but I finally just point blank asked him, what was so different about that last surgery? And he excused the nurse out of the room, got up, shut the door, came back over, and he asked me, what do you remember? And we had a short but intimate talk, and he acknowledged that the anesthesiologist had made a mistake. He himself was not involved with this directly, but he came in to do the surgery, and obviously I'm totally unconscious now, not the normal deal. And long story short, he asked if I wanted to sue the hospital. And at that time, as I shared, I was brought up a very devout Christian, and in my beliefs, my teachings, I was taught nothing good comes from suing someone. You shouldn't do that. So I chose not to. That resulted in the whole cover-up thing was really weird, because after the recovery room, the nurses didn't even know what I had went through. So here I am down in the recovery room, and they're like, you need to set up. You need to get up and walk around. I couldn't feel my limbs. I mean, I am totally paralyzed. And one of the nurses set me up kind of leaning against the back wall, and I fell forward, hit that stupid little tray that they have on wheels. It shot across the room, hit my wife in the mouth, bloodied her nose. They did 100% pay for all of her treatment. I fell out of the beds. I had blood. I smashed the side of my mouth. But again, the nurses, they didn't understand what was going on with any of this. Looking back, I should have whistleblowed on that whole situation and or sued them. And I just hope that anesthesiologist didn't do that to anybody else, and especially kill somebody, But that was a matter of life and death kind of thing. That was the closest thing I could come up with in my stories.
Mine might be a tough one. Have you ever seen a person behave in a way that was completely counter to their normal behavior? Not saying possessed, but just not themselves for some reason, or just something completely out of the ordinary.
I saw that with a family member, and basically it was this person is normally pretty laid back, pretty chill. They are much like you and I. They let things get to them. It builds up a little bit. It was kind of that volcano release, or at least that's what I've told myself. But just snapped and literally threw something across the room and shouted and stormed out of the building. And I won't say who it was, but it was a family member. And I remember it really caught me off guard that the person acted that way. And they didn't come back. Sometimes 10, 15 minutes, cool down, blow it off. Oh man, I made a total fool of myself. I'm so sorry. They didn't come back. It was days before I came across it. It was a little awkward. Finally talked about it, and they just were like, I was just having a really bad day, and it finally just, straw broke the camel's back. But that came out of nowhere, and it was a little frightening, a little jarring.
For me, it's my brother, who is kind of a pushover a lot of the time, but I can push his buttons. I learned very long time ago.
Well how to.
And one of my favorite stories about that is just my mom had bought a new house. We moved in. We were doing some yard work to level things and, shoveling dirt and moving things, And I guess he shoveled like a shovel full of dirt into my sister's face. And my sister was a little kid at that point. And I yelled at him, what are you doing, man? You gotta be careful, blah, 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 blah. And I just wouldn't ease up on him. And we both had I think rakes or hose or something. And he bulled up on me like he was going to go. And
just because you scolded him for throwing dirt in your sister's face?
We can't work together, me and my brother. We just can't. And I remember thinking, when he was a younger man and smaller than me, that was one thing. But, that age, he was my size. He's getting to be, we were basically adults almost,
young men.
And so I swung a rake.
Ooh.
Came in low, aiming for, tinder bits. And
you played dirty, Bill.
He stonewalled that and just looked at me and said, and I'm no joke, his exact words, ha ha, do it again. and we threw down the rake. Well, I guess my sister had run in to tell my mom that we were getting ready to kill each other. By the time my mom come out, we were
Let's
laughing.
get ready to rumble.
Yeah, by the time my mom come out, we were laughing because what do you do when somebody
Threw
does
you off
that?
guard. Yeah.
But apparently there was one other person who ever got him to that point, and he was living with this person, and I guess she was just relentless in her needling of him. And he was eating breakfast before he was getting ready to leave for work. And I guess he just kind of put his hands down on the table, and he said, you know what? F you. And she was just like jaw on the floor. Because he's
Never
not that kind of guy.
Yeah.
So when he gets angry, he's not the same person.
Well, I think that can be true with all of us. I know I've lost my temper my share of times.
I mean, I lose my temper, but I don't know that I go. I'm not like him. He's one of those people that'll tell you sometimes it's just, he'll tell you like that wasn't me. I was just mad.
Yeah. Well, we hope that you've enjoyed at least tidbits of tonight's podcast on Father Malachi Martin, the Exorcist. A lot of behind-the-scenes intelligence and reports there from a very interesting man that I honestly had not really heard much about. So it was a learning experience for myself and one of Bill's topics that he brought to us. And I very much enjoyed it, and we hope that you did as well. Thank you so much for listening.
Hey, real quick, call to action. I think Eric would agree. We'd like to grow this. Nightmares on the Lost Highway.
Absolutely.
If you could, if you're listening on Apple, if you would go and give us a review and rate us. If you have some feedback, that's fine too. Whatever platform you're listening, follow us, rate us, give us some reviews. That helps get some recognition and gets our name out there.
We do have a Facebook page, Nightmares on the Lost Highway. You can easily find us if you want to communicate with us. If you want to share some possibilities for future podcasts with us, reach out. We want to talk with you guys. So a question, Bill.
Really?
Really?
You gonna do this again?
Do it again. Why do it every damn time? Why do I do that? I got you barricaded in a... We're waiting on Bill to go meet his son to get his thumb drive. Once again, Bill has forgotten his thumb drive. I wish I could say it was the first time. It's not. But he has left me in the recording studio to go up front to get that. You go, Bill. Welcome back. There may or may not be some recordings left.
Did it to you if you remember correctly.
Oh, yeah.
I want to take a time to thank the people that helped bring this all together. Alex Tudor, you can almost call him our producer at this point. Sarah Tudor, who also helps with some of the technical stuff. I want to take a moment to extend thanks to Eric for letting us use his space to record in, kind of our makeshift studio.
I, in turn, would like to thank Bill for, one, putting up with me and using this camaraderie to do something we both very much love and enjoy doing, and thank Bill's family for allowing him to spend all the time to work and clean up our recordings and present them in what you hear in the final terms, the final edition, if you will.
And I'd like to thank all of you for continuing to listen. I know we've got some loyal followers out there. We do this as a labor of love, but we're happy that there are people that enjoy it hopefully as much as we do.
Thank you very much.